I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here this morning. If we all band together to do something that's positive for the children, it can only have positive results. We have the NAACP, AXO, Peekskill Youth Bureau, Acme Innovates, A-List Event, Project 105. Mila over here, she's behind the camera too. She's doing our fashion show today.
The real mission is to get the community together, share all these resources that are accessible to our youth, but have them under one roof.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Carol Robinson, and I've been asked to give a small talk about the Underground Railroad quilts that were used as signals or notification to the community, the slave community, that there might be a run to freedom. And well, the quilts, from what I understand and what I've researched, were made out of different types of fabrics. They were made out of scraps of material, sackcloth, whatever was available to put together. Old clothing that someone had or got torn or ran out of size or whatever, they would use that as part of the quilts. And the information that I'm going to share with you, I've gotten out of a couple of books. One is called Hidden in Plain View by Jacqueline Tobin, and it explains the history. It's from Ozella Williams, tells about her family and things that she went through coming up and what her grandmother told her and explained to her as far as how the plantations were run. A lot of times when slaves were sold, they were not allowed to take their possessions with them. So a lot of the quilts that they would amass would go to community. So a lot of people had lots of quilts that once they finished putting them together, if they got sold, they would be given out to whoever needed to have a quilt. And the other book that I had gone through was Underground Railroad Sampler by Eleanor Burns. And this is where I got most of my patterns from, the different aspects of your patterns. So let's see what I've got here. Okay. Well, my history is I like to do all kinds of crafts. I'm a craft person. I've got to do something with my hands. I get bored and I get crazy. I need to do something. So I quilt, I crochet, I sew, I knit, I torch, I do lamp work. And those are a few of the things that I like, little small projects. I can't do anything big. Quilts was something that was a major accomplishment for me because they take time and energy and shopping and all of that. But it was something that I felt I needed to do. So the first one, I don't think I have a picture of. Some of the quilts that are in the lounge are part of the display that I use, but I don't think I have. Okay.
I think if you click twice more, you might have a picture.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the one after that.
Okay. This particular quilt is called Ships. And this was after they made their way up to Cleveland, the Great Lakes. They had to look for ships that were run, or ferries that were run by free blacks or abolitionists who would take them from that point to Canada. So these signals, the first one really is Monkey Wrench. Monkey Wrench is in the lounge, and what that says is we're getting ready to make a run. The person who would organize it would usually hang these particular quilts from their porches or their clotheslines because they got dirty and they needed to be aired out. So it wasn't uncommon to see quilts hanging from porches and what have you. But if there was one person who was the major organizer who would hang this particular quilt. Also, it's also called double monkey wrench as well. And it was to let them know that they need to amass their tools, their weapons, if they had knives, hatchets, whatever, their clothing, and to bundle them and get them ready. This was to let the community know that there was going to be a run. Whenever you saw that quilt hanging, because it usually belonged to someone, when you saw that hanging on the line or over the porch rail, you know we're getting ready. This is your signal. And it would stay for maybe a week, 2 weeks, so everybody on the plantation had an opportunity to see it. And whoever wanted to go on the run or escape, they would start to work at that. And from what I understand through some reading, that Frederick Douglass's family quilt is a monkey wrench. So he was a person of station. So he was the organizer. He would have been, if it was not him, it was his parents or his grandparents before him that had that used that as part of their signal system. The next one is also on the other side. It's called Wagon Wheel. And Wagon Wheel said, the monkey wrench turns the wagon wheel. So we're getting ready to, gather it up. We've got to remember, because all of these quilts were signals to remember. They weren't so much that you would see them on your road or on your travels. It was that you had to put them to memory. You had to have the way things would go. You're going to go here, you're going to go there, you're going to see this, you're going to see that, and you to remember from these quilts that was the signal that you had to keep in your mind, that you had to keep that message in your mind so that you knew where you were going and who you were going to run into. So the wagon wheel pulled the monkey wrench. The monkey wrench turned the wagon wheel. Okay, so when they got finished organizing that kind of thing, and in their mind they said, okay, I've got that one. What's the next one? The next one is bear paw. And bear paw was to let folks know, they said there's two ways. They either travel in the spring or in the summer when crops were high, and the bears would be awake. They would come out of hibernation, and they would go looking, foraging for food, water, fish. So if you got stranded or you didn't have enough provisions, you were to look for the bear paw tracks. The bear paw tracks would take you to berries, or take you to the lake, or take you to where there's fresh water, so that you could re-up and pull yourself together and have what you needed in order to sustain yourself. Well, we went through this part where my quilts are usually done in batiks and African prints. The fabrics may have changed, but not so much the messages. The messages are still the same. The patterns are still the same. I posted some of the things on Facebook or whatever, one of those medias, and someone from Tennessee, or I forget, was a quilting society, wrote back and said, thank you for letting us know that there's more to what we have been doing, because these patterns have been going for generations, but they had no knowledge of the significance that they played in our history. So it was something that they learned from us, that we learned from just looking at the quilts. Okay. Let me see, I have bear paw here somewhere. Okay, this is a kind of stretched out version of bear paw. This is bear paw here. But when it's done right, it's like this. It's paws that come together. The one before that, is it Crossroads? No. That is Log Cabin. Log Cabin was always, this is called field and furrow, which is how they did their fields. Now, in this particular one, there's always one square, if you see up in the corner, if you can see it, that's different color than all the rest of them. And that was also a signal. Either the red, which was the hearth and home, was your fireplace, or you might find a yellow square, which meant look for the light, look for the signal before you come in. This is after they've gotten on the road and they've come to a place where this would be hanging. They could see this particular quilt. And if it had a yellow square, it said, stay where you are until you see a signal. A black meant safe house, come in. You don't have to worry, everything is good. There's your ships from the other side, which was once they got to a certain point. But there's also one called crossroads, which let them say, when you get to a crossroad, there is no turning back. You're leaving old and you're going to the new. So remember, because at some point there's going to be trial and error, there's going to be pain and suffering. You might be cold, you might be wet, you might be hungry, but when you get to a certain point in your travels, there's no going back for you. You have to keep going. And this is to give them stamina, or to give them cause to move forward, to let them know this is what you have to do. You have to keep moving. Don't stop. There was some stations that were called, in Cleveland, it was called Hope, was one of the stations of the crossroads. And the men were called, was it Hardware? Was it Hardware? Yeah. The men were called Hardware. If they've talked about slaves, they said, well, I've got some hardware over here that needs to go to so-and-so, and I've also got some dry goods, which are the women, which needs to be moved to such and such and such. When they got to a certain point where there were a lot of free blacks, and they had to camouflage or talk in a certain language so that the people that are looking for them didn't know who they were, or didn't know what they were talking about. And when they were organizing all this, the slaves had an idea that if you put a turned over pot on your porch, master couldn't hear what you were saying. Sound would go up in the pot. That was their thinking. So whenever there was a pot turned over on the porch, you know there was a meeting going on. So even though master didn't have any idea of what was going on, but the community knew. And log cabin, we just went through that. And there's the next one is called shoe fly. Shoe fly was a person who was the friend of the slaves. He would gather them up when they came, because now they have their bundles, they have their clothes, they have their weapons, their whatever they need, axes, whatever it is, because these slaves were chosen for their skills. They were chosen because either they were good at cooking, they were blacksmiths, they were artisans, they could make crafts, they could do pottery. There were no slaves that came through just because you were going to be here. They had to be good farmers. They had to know how to have some sort of skill. And that's what made them so valuable to the masters, because a blacksmith's got to repair the pots, he's got to sharpen the knives, he's got to sharpen the tools, he's got to repair any kind of fixtures that need to be repaired. He was a very important person on the plantation. So therefore, all of that, bringing in the slaves were the ones that did make it through, were very, very strong, very powerful people. So shoe fly was to take these folks and take them to a house, take them to a house where they would be safe. And now, the next thing that they would say would be bow tie. Bow tie was to let them know that you needed to have clothes. You needed to have your Sunday go-to meeting, so that when you got to your safe place, either in Cleveland, Ohio, or Detroit, you had clothes that you could put on that you could blend in, because that's where basically most of the free slaves lived. So you wanted to blend into the community, so therefore you had to change your clothes, because by the time you got to that point, you were in tatters, you were dirty, you were a wreck. You needed to have fresh clothes, and they would also, shoe fly would also supply fresh clothes for the escapees to come into that area. So once they got, they also had a way of finding direction. It was called flying geese. And flying geese was, geese fly in a certain direction through the summer and the winter or whatever. And it would be a collection, I don't know if it's one over here. Is it one over here? No. Okay. Flying geese was triangles that were pointing in one direction. So you had one set that went this way, had one set that went that way, had one set that went this way, and you had another set that went that way. But in one of those sets, there was always something different in one of them. And as these people traveled, they needed to know where north and south in the different directions. So whoever had that particular quilt would turn it so that if I'm facing going east and I need to go north, they would turn that particular quilt in another direction to let them know you need to go that way. You follow the geese. And that because geese make a lot of noise when they fly over, whenever you hear them, I always look up because I'm always looking to see where they go. They're going north. So that way you would follow the direction of the geese. You follow them as they go along. And they had to remember all of this in order to try and keep going. You know, they had to have some kind of program in order to follow. So then, once they got to, they also had another quilt that they put up called Drunkard's Path. And Drunkard's Path was to let them understand, to let them understand that they needed to not go straight. They figured, they believed that anything that goes in a straight line is the devil's work. So, you don't want to follow the devil. You got to go around this way, and then you backtrack this way, or you go there, like here, and go this way, so that who's ever following you gets confused and don't know which way. You know how you talk about in when people are hunting, they backtrack themselves, come back, and then they go forward, or they step over and they go this way. That was the reason for Drunkard's Path, was to let them know that you should not travel in a straight line. Always zigzag, because it will throw off the agents that were looking for you. And then when they got to a certain point, in the 1600s, there were a lot of free blacks that had ferries. And that's when we come to ships. Ships were just to remind them that when you get to a certain point, that you had to look for someone that could take you across the way. And so that was what would happen. They would help them to escape. You know, you'd either have free blacks that had ferries, or you had abolitionists, white folks that had ferries that were willing to take them over into Canada. And the last one, we've come to the end now, is North Star. And that was how they guided their ship. They looked for the North Star. And that was if they got turned around, if they got separated at night, if you want to go north, you look for the North Star. And that, if you follow that star, you will get to Canada and to freedom in that respect. So this was kind of busy because I didn't have all of them here to show you, but there's some on the other side. But if you have any questions, I'll take those. And that's basically it, you know. Yes.
I'm sorry I was late entering, and you might have answered this already, but didn't the owners, the white folks, have any savvy at all about this? I mean, I just can't understand how they wouldn't figure out that this particular thing is a signal that my folks are about to move from here, and be able to stop it, or you know, somewhere along the line, the turned over pot that I would think that they would have figured some things out.
Well, yes, they might have, but it doesn't mean that every plantation did things in the same way. There were always different times that they traveled, and these quilts were used. They weren't just signals that were put away after they was hung up. This was a quilt that got used by the family. Now, if it showed up on a certain porch, or it showed up at a certain time, the person in charge, who was Monkey Wrench, would say, "You're making a run. Watch for the signals." And then they would let everybody else know on the plantation that this is what's happening with it. And that, you know, after that one came down, they would leave it up for a little while, and it would come down and another one would go up. But it would probably be on the same porch or on the same line. So these were quilts that were used by the community you know, if someone had shoe fly, then they would bring shoe fly and it would hang. If someone had, not everybody had a whole complete set, but everybody had these quilts that they used on a regular basis. They used them to sleep under. You know, the children played on them, jumped on them, did all kinds of things with them. So they had to be washed. So you would wash them. If you hung it, it was on so-and-so's porch, not necessarily. But if you showed up on such and such porch, this is what it is. So everybody had their own way of doing, of letting folks know what was going on. You know? And as far as the pot is concerned, that was just one instance, you know, of one particular plantation that this was their thing. And it didn't have to be sitting directly on the porch. It could have been sitting on the floor, sitting on the side. You know, oh, well, I'm cleaning it out. It's drying, you know. You know, they had a way of camouflaging their information. I'm sorry, sir, you had a question?
Yes, I do. I'm concerned, or I would like to know about the ship owners. What was the driving force for them to help slaves to get from Detroit to Canada? Was there a fee involved? Do you know?
Now, see, I really couldn't tell you. I wasn't there. But
I'm sorry?
I said I wasn't there. I really couldn't tell you whether the charge, they probably didn't have any money, but if they were free and they were part of, these people that traveled and brought these people had a connection with them. They just wasn't arbitrarily going to any particular ferry. They had a person that they worked with that at a certain time of the year, there would be people coming and they would hook up, and these free slaves would help free the rest of them.
I mean, you know, I understand what you're saying, but my reason for asking that is somewhat similar to what goes on today. I mean, as far as Latinos coming from South America, I mean, they don't make that trip for free.
Well, the slaves didn't have any money.
That's my point
You
here.
know, so whoever did this had to do it from their heart, had to help the cause. And there's a lot of people, even though they need money, there's some people that will do this just because they know it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
You know, I'm not saying that they didn't pay them something. Whoever brought them probably had a few pennies to give them to take them across, because they were all going across the lake.
Right.
They were going on the ocean and across the lake and into Canada. And this is something that they did, you know. They might have gotten a couple of sacks of corn, or, you know what I'm saying? It could have been other things that were used as money or to payment for their travel.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else got an answer? Question? No?
Do you have any of the original quilts? Do you know if there are any in a collection, or they're in museums?
Oh, well, yeah, there are probably some in probably some, well, that's what the one that's in Washington, D.C., I think is an original.
At the African American Museum?
It could be, yes. I haven't been there, so I really couldn't tell you where they would be. All I was trying to do with this was to let folks know, because a lot of people did not realize that the patterns that were made into these quilts had significance, had meanings to us, you know, as black folks, that this is what they used in order to communicate, because they weren't allowed to talk to each other. A lot of them couldn't talk to each other because they didn't share the same language. They weren't allowed to read, they weren't allowed to write. So they had to find some kind of way to get the message across that this was what was going to happen. So when they all finally did learn English and was able to talk to each other a little bit, they used the quilts as their message carrier. You know, this is what we're getting ready to do. And it was like, and it didn't always happen every year. Maybe it was just, maybe once every 2 years or whatever, somebody decided, okay, we need to make this is getting crazy, we need to make a run. You know, and then they would start preparing. This was all part of the preparation for the run. And there's no telling how long the quilts would be available for viewing. I'm just saying maybe a week or 2 weeks until everyone had a chance to see them. And I also found out that a lot of the quilts, some of the quilts were made at the topography of the plantation. So when they would sit down and they would make these things out, they were actually showing where the roads are, they were showing where the water was, they were showing where the fields are, and if it was a cornfield, at what time of the year the corn would be high enough to camouflage them through. They had to sit down and plan all of that out. And every place, even though it was from Florida all the way up, there was different growing times and different times of the year where things were more accessible or more available to them than maybe right now, you know. So they had to kind of figure it out. They had to go by what their topography or what their climate was like in order to see what was ready to go and what wasn't. Yes.
I've seen this exhibit numerous times, and I just want to add something to it, is that what people didn't recognize, a lot of them felt that, oh, it was just a bunch of slaves running north, and they don't recognize the intricate organization that it took, and the logistics, and I'm a logistics type person, and the logistics it took. So this was an organized thing. This wasn't just something that happened helter-skelter. And when I look at the quilts, it reinforces my belief about the organization and the logistics of this movement. Well, not the movement, but of this particular aspect of the trail to freedom.
And that's because there were a lot of escapes from a lot of different plantations all down the East Coast and in the Midwest as well. So they were going through the Appalachians Mountains where the bears were, you know, and they would go through certain areas where certain things were visible at a certain time of the year. So it was really an organized thing where there were sets of people that were in charge of doing certain things. There was a shoe fly, there was a wagon wheel, there was, just like Harriet Tubman, she was instrumental in taking thousands across. But they had to be organized, so they had to have people in place so that when they got to be going, because she would travel all up and down, she's okay, I'm getting ready to bring somebody, so look out for us, and da-da-da-da, and like that. So it was a very organized thing. It wasn't just something that said, well, okay, we're going. No, it wasn't like that. They had to get it, they had to really organize it so that they didn't get caught. And thank God, a lot of them didn't get caught. So it was put together well, it was organized well, and they used what they could use as far as information, you know, media. Hello, anybody here? Hi. So that's it? No more questions? Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.